Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who've attended previous conferences, I can indicate that some of what I have to say you will have heard before, but I would like to think that it is in a slightly different form, and you will see at the top right-hand side of the screen that I believe it is time that decisive action was taken. I believe that we have waited long enough for appropriate action to be taken with prostate cancer, and promises are fine, but let's see some of them fulfilled. I want to start with a brief review of prostate cancer in New Zealand, and I think it's fantastic that women have had available since 1998, that's 20 years ago, a national program of free mammograms and follow-up for asymptomatic women. And that information I obtained from the Ministry of Health website. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. But when you bear in mind that the incidence of breast cancer and the incidence of prostate cancer is somewhat similar, one has to ask why 20 years later are men still waiting? Why do we still have to pay for the tests? And why are some people unable to obtain tests which they ask for? We have just recently had announced the fact that there will be a national bowel screening program rolled out progressively throughout New Zealand, starting with the Hutt Valley and Wairarapa DHBs in this month. And the other DHBs will follow in stages. Again, I think that is absolutely fantastic. I'm certainly not indicating to you or to anybody else that these things should not be happening. But contrast that with what is not happening in prostate cancer. In 2011, the Parliamentary Health Select Committee started an inquiry, and it reported with recommendations in 2013. That is 4 years ago. The same year, we were told that there would be a 4-year awareness and quality improvement program for prostate cancer, and that means that it should have been finished on the 30th of June this year. It has not been finished. The program has been extended for another 12 months. I have sat on the working group of that AQIP program since 2013, and excuse me being extraordinarily cynical, but I don't think that we will see everything finished within the next 12 months. Then we might have some plans finished within the next 12 months, but implementation may be another thing. And so my question is, why are men and their families still waiting? When my wife and I made submissions to the Parliamentary Select Committee in 2011, one of the things that really stuck out in my mind was a question that was asked by one of the MPs of my wife. Why is it that you have joined in making this submission? I don't know what the questioner expected by way of an answer, but the answer to me was obvious and logical, and she said, I have a husband. I have 2 sons. I have sons-in-law. I expect to have grandsons. Prostate cancer affects women as well. They may not suffer from it, but they suffer from it as well. And so I repeat the question, why are men and their families still waiting? Let's look at the question of equity. We should and can rejoice that proactive steps are being taken to identify and treat breast cancer and bowel cancer. We should and can advocate for earlier action to identify and treat prostate cancer. And that's one of the reasons why the Foundation exists. It's one of the reasons why we hold this conference. And as with breast and bowel cancer, the effects of prostate cancer are shared by spouses, by partners, and by families. I'm not expecting you to look at this slide and to follow it, but I have set out there in tabular form the information that appeared in the previous slides Why do I say that the comparisons are odious? False positives and false negatives with prostate cancer and breast cancer tests are really quite similar. Yet many in the medical profession oppose prostate cancer testing while supporting breast cancer testing. I think any doctor who opposed breast cancer screening would be lynched. Quite seriously, I believe that it is now so well accepted in New Zealand that any doctor who spoke out against it could expect a flood of protest. And yet I suspect there is scarcely a week goes by when our office does not receive a call from a man who says, I went to see my GP and said, I want a PSA test, I want something to see whether I've got prostate cancer, and the GP has said, I don't do PSA tests. This practice, if it's a group practice, does not do prostate cancer tests. And that statement, those statements, are simply contrary to the guidance that was issued on the 30th of September 2015. Very significant date. A, because we finally got some guidance that made some sense, but it was also the end of Blue September 2015. What a great way to end the month. I thought, great, we've got there. Now, nearly 2 years later, it's quite apparent we've not got there. And it is simply not good enough. And again, I draw attention to the comparison with women and their access to free mammograms. And that's another oddity. I think it's great that they can get a mammogram for nothing. We have to pay for our PSA tests. I know that mammograms are uncomfortable. My wife refers to it as a breast sandwich, and I'm sure she's not alone. And so to any man who says, oh, I don't want somebody putting their finger up my backside, get a life. Women have been putting up with it for however long. Resources have been provided to ensure the rollout of the National Bowel Screening Program for men and women. 4 years ago, we expected that we might have had something similar for prostate cancer, or at least that we would have programs in place to ensure that the goals and the recommendations that were set by the Parliamentary Select Committee and the 2013 Task Force would actually be realised. This guidance was issued by the Minister of Health on the 30th of September 2015. We are still coming across doctors who say, we are not aware of this guidance. I was recently asked to look at a man's situation who had made a complaint to the Health and Disability Commissioner that he had been refused in the same medical practice by 2 different doctors over 2 or 3 different years. He had been refused a test to see whether he had prostate cancer. And that was a practice that adopts the we do not test for prostate cancer approach. The Health and Disability Commissioner obtained advice from a doctor who advises the Health and Disability Commissioner, who said, no, that's fine. No, that's fine. There are all sorts of problems with PSA tests. And I just cannot understand how the Health and Disability Commissioner goes to a doctor for professional advice who is simply ignorant, it appears, that in September 2015, guidance was issued for the benefit of the medical profession and for men in the community as to what should be done. And the advice the Health and Disability Commissioner got was inconsistent with that guidance. I went and saw the Minister of Health in June last year to raise these issues. And I was informed that the information was sent out to DHBs and PHOs. and that the ministry regarded that as being sufficient. And it beggars belief that all of this money is spent on trying to improve the situation for men with prostate cancer, and the Ministry of Health sends out a communication to DHBs and PHOs and then washes its hands of responsibility for ensuring that GPs get the information. So I asked the Minister, I said, if we had some terrible epidemic in New Zealand, does the Ministry have the ability to communicate direct with every doctor? And there was a Ministry staff member there, and there were exchanges of a few questions and comments, and I got confirmation, yes, indeed they do. Why wasn't that guidance sent to every doctor in the country? Why wasn't it sent to every GP? Why didn't the Ministry follow up? Why didn't the Ministry do an education program for GPs? Why didn't the professional organisations run training programs for GPs? Why is it that now, 2 years later, nothing seems to have happened? It's a bit like Pontius Pilate washing his hands of it. Well, we know we sent this information out, and if it hasn't got to the GPs, well, that's not actually our problem. It is the problem for those men who try and get PSA tests and are refused. It is a problem for those men who don't think to ask, but whose GPs ought, if they follow the guidance, to be considering whether the issue ought to be raised with their patients. In simple terms, it's unacceptable. This is an election year. You are going to be hearing from 2 politicians later today. I don't know what they're going to say about prostate cancer, if anything. But my message to you is spread the word and get your candidates asked questions. If you are elected, what would you do to ensure that the prostate cancer guidance that was issued in 2015 actually makes a difference? It's not good enough, in my view, for the ministry to issue something and then say our job is done. There is simply a lack of accountability. And I suppose if I have one message today, it is people should be held to account. We should demand action. And I don't think I've ever said this to a prostate cancer conference or AGM, but I have lost patience. I also want to highlight the fact that while the general community is disadvantaged, we have large segments of our community who are particularly disadvantaged. Ross Lawrenson is sitting in the 3rd row back, and he headed up the Midlands studies that came out a couple of years ago. And they confirm that Maori and Pacific Island people and those in lower socio-economic groups and those who live somewhere remote or in smaller communities are disadvantaged on many levels because they lack ready access to medical advice and expertise, and because they are remote from treatment and post-operative care. For those of you who live in larger centres, can I give you an illustration of this? I was involved in setting up the Hawke's Bay support group, and with the senior urological nurse at the Hastings DHB, we organised a meeting. She, God bless her, wrote to everybody who'd had treatment for prostate cancer in the Hawke's Bay Hospital in the previous 3 years. We had a gentleman and his wife attend who came from Ruatoria. How many of you know where Ruatoria is? Most of you. That's about 7 hours drive from Hastings where we were having this meeting. That's a long way to go for treatment. 2011. Parliamentary Select Committee report noted that inequities and unfair differences are avoidable. Well, when are we going to do something effective to avoid it? We also have a lack of support after treatment. That slide quotes a 2016 study from Australia, which indicates that 82% of the men involved in that study reported unmet supportive care needs. And I suggest to you that the Aussies aren't that far behind us. In many respects, they're probably ahead of us, with all due respect to our Australian colleagues down here. It must be pretty similar to New Zealand if we did a similar study. Even with government-funded treatment, the financial costs of and losses following prostate cancer treatment are significant. And in terms of the psychosocial issues, they are, again, I'm sure, very similar to Australia. Again, the Midland studies reported and identified significant deficiencies in palliative care. That is something which the Awareness and Quality Improvement Program is intended to address. The Ministry of Health is supposedly leading a review of adult palliative care services. When I accessed that page in preparation for this presentation, I noted the page was last updated on the 26th of August 2015, and the cynic in me concluded that this is a statement of future intent which may or may not continue to appear on the website. It may or may not be realised, but if it hasn't been updated in the last 2 years, sweet little has been done since. As I stated in my address at the beginning of our 2016 conference, that's just last year, we must hold the government, the ministry and doctors to account to deliver what the Prostate Cancer Quality and Awareness Improvement Program promises, including, and I quote, better access to good primary care, easier access to treatment, better post-operative care and more effective palliative care. When can we expect those promises to be fulfilled? Go out there and ask your candidates in the next 3 months what is going on. What would they do to ensure that something actually happens rather than repeated meaningless statements of intent?